You're just a janitor. Your only job here is to clean. Stop pretending you understand business. People like you need to know your place." The words echoed through the glass-walled boardroom as Brad Mitchell's face turned red with anger, his finger pointing accusingly at the woman standing quietly in the corner. Around the conference table, a dozen executives sat frozen, watching this heated confrontation unfold before their eyes. Sarah Johnson stood there, her cleaning cart beside her, tears welling up in her eyes, but her back straight, with quiet dignity. For 3 long years, she had endured the whispers, the condescending looks, the casual dismissals. But this moment, this public humiliation in front of the company's leadership, this was different. Brad's voice grew louder, more vicious. "I don't know why you think you can just interrupt our meeting and act like you belong here. You clean toilets for a living." Nobody in that building had any idea who Sarah Johnson really was. They saw the uniform, the cleaning supplies, the quiet woman who worked the night shift while they slept comfortably in their beds. They made assumptions based on appearances, never bothering to look deeper. Then Sarah spoke and revealed her hidden talent. The stunned silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Jaws dropped. Eyes widened. The man who had been screaming moments before now stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. If you believe everyone should be respected and a book should not be judged by its cover, click on the subscribe button and type where you're watching from in the comments. Sarah Johnson was 45 years old. For the past 3 years, she worked as the janitor at Global Tech Industries. But Sarah wasn't just any janitor. As she cleaned the empty offices, she wore earbuds and listened to podcasts from around the world. One night she might listen to French news. The next night, German business shows, then Japanese programs or Chinese cultural discussions. Here's what nobody at Global Tech knew. Sarah had a big secret. This quiet woman who they barely noticed had once been Dr. Sarah Johnson. She used to be a respected professor who taught about languages at universities in Africa. She could speak 17 different languages fluently. But life sometimes throws terrible surprises at good people. Sarah was born in Africa to parents who were both teachers and chairmen. She had built a wonderful life teaching at the university. Then something terrible happened. There was a political war in her city. In one horrible day, Sarah lost her husband and her children. She lost her home, her job, and her entire world. With nothing left but the clothes she wore and a broken heart, she ran away to America to try to start over. Starting a new life in America was much harder than she thought it would be. Even though she had impressive education and experience, she couldn't get the right paperwork transferred. She didn't know anyone who could help her. The sadness from losing her family made everything harder. The only job she could find was cleaning buildings as a janitor. Sarah never complained about her situation. She wasn't angry or bitter. She just did her job quietly and professionally. But the people who worked didn't treat her very well. Most of them just ignored her. Some were actually rude to her. The boss of the whole company was Marcus Wellington. He was 38 years old and had recently taken over the company from his father. Marcus was smart. He had gone to a top business school and had done well in the technology industry. But he was facing a big problem that was keeping him awake at night. Global Tech was trying to expand their business to other countries. But every time they tried, something went wrong. They were losing millions of dollars on failed deals with companies in Japan, France, Germany, and other important markets. What should have been simple business deals kept falling apart. Marcus was under a lot of pressure from the board of directors. These were the people who helped make big decisions for the company. Many of them didn't think Marcus was ready to be the boss. Some said he was too young and only got the job because his father used to run the company. These failed international deals were starting to prove they might be right. There was also Jessica Morrison, the HR director. She had worked at the company for over 10 years. Jessica always talked about how the company welcomed people from different backgrounds and had hidden biases that affected how she actually treated people. The one person at Global Tech who was genuinely nice to Sarah was David Chen. He was the security guard who worked the same hours as Sarah. David was in his 60s and used to be a police officer. After he retired, he took the security job to stay busy and earn some extra money. He was the only employee who actually talked to Sarah like a real person. He asked her how her day was going, told her stories about his grandchildren, and treated her with basic respect. But then there was Brad Mitchell. Brad represented everything wrong with some office environments. He was a junior executive in his early 30s with a business degree and an ego bigger than his actual abilities. Brad was openly rude to anyone he thought was beneath him. This especially included the cleaning staff. He would make mean comments when Sarah could hear him. He would leave messes on purpose for her to clean up. Most of the time he treated her like she was invisible, unless he wanted someone to feel superior to. Every night, as Sarah cleaned the executive floors, she couldn't help but hear the conversations in those glass conference rooms. Important executives would stay late, arguing about deals and discussing business strategy. More and more, they were getting frustrated about their problems with international business. Sarah would listen to these conversations, and what she heard made her feel frustrated too. These highly paid executives were making basic mistakes in their international negotiations. They were saying names wrong, not understanding cultural rules, and approaching business relationships in ways that were almost guaranteed to offend their international partners. One evening, Sarah was cleaning the 42nd floor executive conference room when she heard a discussion that would change everything. Marcus Wellington was in the room with his top executives, and they were clearly upset and desperate. They had just lost another major deal. This time it was with a German car company that could have brought in $50 million every year. The German executives had walked away from the negotiation, saying that Global Tech didn't understand cultural differences and wasn't professional enough. Sarah listened as Marcus walked around the room, clearly stressed. "We're losing so much money on these international deals. Every single negotiation falls apart, and I can't figure out why. We have great products, good prices, and solid technical support. What are we missing?" One of his vice presidents said, "Maybe these foreign companies just don't like how direct Americans are. We're being honest and straightforward, and they're too sensitive about it." Another executive added, "I think we need to hire expensive consultants, someone who knows about international business." As Sarah continued cleaning around the room quietly, she was getting more and more frustrated. She could see exactly what they were doing wrong. She could identify every cultural mistake, every language error, every missed opportunity to build the relationships that international business depends on. The Japanese deal had failed because they rushed things. They tried to jump straight to signing contracts without building relationships first. In Japanese business culture, trust and personal relationships must come before any deal. This takes time and patience. The French negotiations fell apart because the Americans were too casual and informal. French business culture values proper manners, correct protocol, and intelligent discussion. By treating the meetings like casual conversations, Global Tech had accidentally shown disrespect. The German deal had just failed because the Americans focused on emotions and relationship building. But German business culture values detailed technical information, exact timelines, and logical arguments based on facts and data. Each failure could have been predicted and prevented. It was painful for Sarah to watch because she had the expertise to help. She had spent years studying how language and culture work together in business relationships. But she was just the janitor. Nobody asked for her opinion. Nobody even noticed that she was there, listening to their expensive mistakes with the knowledge to solve their problems. Type in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes and you had the knowledge to save a company millions of dollars? But nobody would listen to you because of your job? It was Tuesday morning, 7:30 a.m., and Sarah Johnson was still cleaning the executive floors when Brad Mitchell and Jessica Morrison arrived early for their presentation. "Oh, great," Brad said loudly when he saw Sarah. "The cleaning lady is still here, taking forever to do a simple job." Jessica laughed along. "Some people just work at different speeds, Brad. She's black. What did you expect?" As they discussed their upcoming German client meeting, Sarah heard them butchering the pronunciation of German names and technical terms. Without thinking, she quietly whispered the correct pronunciations under her breath. Brad's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me? Did the janitor just try to correct us?" "No, sir," Sarah said quietly. "I was just waiting for the elevator." "Don't lie to me," Brad snarled, walking toward her aggressively. "You were listening to our private conversation and actually thought you could correct your betters?" Jessica joined in, moving closer with a cruel smile. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. People who don't understand their place in this building." Other employees began gathering, forming a circle around Sarah like spectators at a cruel show. Instead of helping, they watched with anticipation. "You know what your problem is?" Brad continued, his voice echoing through the hallway. "You don't understand that you're not an employee here. You're the help. You're here to clean up after educated people, not listen to conversations between professionals." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "This is insubordination, clear disrespect for workplace hierarchy." The crowd grew larger, with more employees joining the circle. Some looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up to defend her. "I want you to repeat after me," Brad demanded, stepping closer to intimidate her. "Say, 'I am just a janitor, and I don't belong in conversations with educated people.'" "I can't say that," Sarah whispered. "You can't follow simple instructions." Brad's voice exploded with rage. "This is exactly the attitude problem we're dealing with." Jessica jumped in. "Let's document this. Insubordination, failure to follow direct instructions, disrupting the workplace." The threat was clear. They could fire her and destroy any chance of finding other work. Tom Peterson from accounting added, "Maybe we should call security about someone who clearly doesn't respect workplace policies." "Please," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I just want to do my job. I need this work." "Maybe you should have thought about that before acting like you belonged in conversations with your betters," Brad laughed harshly. "One more incident, even the smallest thing, and you're gone," Brad added menacingly. "You are here to clean. That's all." Jessica continued coldly. "You don't listen to business conversations. You don't offer opinions. You do your job quietly and invisibly. And maybe next time you'll think twice before acting like you belong in the same spaces as educated people." Brad concluded with satisfaction. Sarah left that office feeling like something inside her had died. She had been publicly humiliated and professionally threatened, all for quietly correcting a pronunciation under her breath. That same morning, the German deal collapsed spectacularly due to exactly the cultural mistakes Sarah could have prevented. The company lost $50 million, while the woman who could have saved the deal continued cleaning their offices in invisible silence. Months later, during the late-night board meeting where executives discussed their international failures, Sarah was cleaning nearby when she overheard a heated French conversation on speakerphone. The executives looked confused and frustrated, clearly not understanding what was being said. The same people who had mocked her pronunciation corrections would soon discover that the janitor they had tormented was more qualified than anyone sitting at their executive table. The tension in the conference room was incredibly thick. Marcus Wellington might lose his job as CEO if these international failures continued. His executives were blaming each other, making excuses, and suggesting expensive solutions that would probably fail just as badly as their previous attempts. And in the corner of that room, emptying trash cans and cleaning surfaces, was the one person who could have solved all their problems. But they couldn't see past her uniform to recognize the brilliant mind right in front of them. Without thinking, Sarah quietly responded in perfect French, offering to help translate the critical business terms the client was using. The room fell silent. Marcus Wellington, the CEO, stared at her in shock. "Did you just speak French?" he asked. That was the moment everything began to change, when the woman they had dismissed and degraded finally revealed the brilliant mind they had been overlooking all along. The CEO turned to look at who was speaking French fluently. His eyes fell on her as she spoke the words. "I have a PhD in linguistics, and I speak 17 languages fluently." The words hung in the air like electricity after lightning strikes. You could hear a pin drop in that boardroom. The silence was so thick you could almost touch it. Brad Mitchell stood there with his mouth hanging open, looking like someone had just slapped him across the face. The other executives around the table were frozen, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Marcus Wellington, the CEO who had been watching this whole scene unfold, felt his world shift in that moment. Here was this woman he had walked past hundreds of times, this quiet janitor who cleaned his office every day. And she had just claimed to have credentials that surpassed most of the people sitting at his executive table. But Marcus wasn't the type of leader who took things at face value. He had built his reputation on asking tough questions and verifying claims. So he did something that surprised everyone in that room, including Sarah herself. "I know this sounds impossible," Marcus said, his tone respectful but firm. "But if what you just said is true, I need to know. Can you prove it? Can you demonstrate these language skills you're talking about?" Sarah took a deep breath. For 3 years, she had hidden this part of herself. For 3 years, she had listened to these people struggle with problems she could solve. Now, finally, someone was asking her to show who she really was. "What would you like me to demonstrate, Mr. Wellington?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Marcus thought for a moment. "We just lost a deal with Schneider Automotive in Germany. Start there. Speak to me in German." Sarah's posture changed. It was subtle, but you could see her transform from the quiet janitor into the confident professor she used to be. When she spoke, her voice was clear and authoritative. She began speaking in perfect German, her pronunciation flawless, her grammar impeccable. She wasn't just speaking tourist-level German or basic business phrases. This was sophisticated, complex German with technical terminology that most Americans would never even attempt. The board members exchanged shocked glances. Jessica Morrison, the HR director who had been so dismissive earlier, looked like she might faint. Even Brad, who had been so cruel just minutes before, was staring at Sarah with his mouth still hanging open. But Marcus wanted more proof. "Now Japanese. We lost the Tanaka Industries deal last month." Without missing a beat, Sarah switched to Japanese. Her accent was perfect, her tone respectful in the way that Japanese business culture demands. She spoke with the formal politeness that American executives always struggle with when dealing with Japanese clients. "French," Marcus said, almost whispering now. Sarah immediately began speaking in elegant French, the kind you hear from educated Parisians, not the broken French most Americans learn in high school. "Mandarin Chinese," he said, barely believing what he was witnessing. Again, Sarah switched languages effortlessly. Her Mandarin was flawless, with the subtle tonal variations that make the difference between sounding like a native speaker and sounding like a tourist. By this point, the entire room was dead silent, except for Sarah's voice. These executives, who had spent their entire careers thinking they were the smartest people in the room, were watching a janitor demonstrate linguistic abilities that none of them possessed. But Marcus wanted to understand more about Sarah's qualifications. "What other languages do you speak?" "You said 17. Sarah began listing them: English, German, French, Japanese, Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, Hindi, Swahili, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Dutch, and Korean. The executives around the table were looking at each other in amazement. Most of them struggled with basic Spanish from high school. "And you're fluent in all of these?" Marcus asked. "Fluent enough to conduct business negotiations, understand cultural nuances, and navigate complex legal and technical terminology," Sarah confirmed. Marcus was beginning to see possibilities that he had never imagined. "Sarah, you mentioned you used to consult for international companies. Can you tell me more about that?" "I worked with companies that were expanding into new markets," she explained. "I helped them understand cultural expectations, trained their executives on appropriate communication styles, and developed strategies for building relationships with international partners." She went on to describe specific projects she had worked on, companies she had helped, and successful international expansions she had facilitated. It became clear that she had exactly the expertise that global tech desperately needed. But then Marcus asked the question that brought everything full circle. "Sarah, if you had all this experience and expertise, how did you end up working as a janitor?" This is where Sarah's story became deeply personal again. She explained how losing her family had devastated her emotionally and professionally. She talked about the challenges of starting over in a new country without connections or support systems. "When you're grieving and trying to survive in a new place, you take whatever work you can find," she said simply. "Cleaning buildings paid the bills and allowed me to support what was left of my family back in Africa." She wiped away fresh tears. "But I never stopped learning. Even while I was cleaning these offices, I was listening to international news, following global business trends, and staying current with research in my field. I knew that someday, maybe, I might get a chance to use my knowledge again." Marcus looked around the room at his executives, then back at Sarah. "Sarah, I have to ask you directly. Would you be willing to help us? Would you be willing to use your expertise to help global tech succeed in international markets?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Sarah had spent 3 years being invisible, 3 years being overlooked and undervalued. Now, suddenly, the CEO of the company was asking for her help. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice steady despite her tears, "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask me that question." This was the moment when everything began to change. This was when assumptions were shattered, when hidden potential was revealed, and when the true cost of workplace discrimination became clear to everyone in that room. The woman they had dismissed as just a janitor was about to prove that expertise and intelligence come in forms that many people never expect to recognize. The words that Marcus Wellington spoke next would change everything for Sarah Johnson and global tech industries forever. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and determination, "I need to see this in action. We have a Japanese client, Tanaka Industries, that we've been trying to close a deal with for 8 months. They've been polite but distant, and we can't seem to make any real progress. Would you be willing to help us with a video call?" Sarah felt her heart racing. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for 3 long years. The chance to finally use her skills to prove that she was more than just the woman who emptied their trash cans. "I would be honored to help," she replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. Marcus immediately called his assistant. "Cancel my next 3 meetings and set up a video conference with Mr. Tanaka at Tanaka Industries in Tokyo." Tell them we have some new developments we'd like to discuss regarding our partnership proposal. Within 30 minutes, the call was arranged. Word had already started spreading through the office that something unusual was happening in the executive conference room. Employees were finding excuses to walk past the glass walls, trying to catch a glimpse of what was going on. As they prepared for the call, Marcus asked Sarah, "What should I know before we start this conversation?" Sarah's transformation was remarkable to watch. The quiet janitor was gone, replaced by the confident international business consultant she had once been. "Mr. Wellington, in Japanese business culture, the opening of any meeting is crucial. We need to begin with proper greetings and acknowledgement of the honor of speaking with them. I'll need to reference their company's history and achievements before we discuss any business matters. Also, we should never rush them for an answer. Patience and respect for their decision-making process is essential." When the video call connected, Mr. Tanaka appeared on the screen, a distinguished Japanese businessman in his 60s, wearing a perfectly pressed suit. Behind him, you could see two other executives from his company. What happened next was like watching magic. Sarah bowed respectfully toward the camera and began speaking in flawless Japanese. Her pronunciation was perfect, her tone was appropriately formal, and her entire demeanor showed deep respect for Japanese business customs. She opened by thanking Mr. Tanaka for honoring them with his time and acknowledging the long and respected history of Tanaka Industries. She spoke about the company's reputation for quality and innovation in terms that clearly pleased the Japanese executives. Marcus and the other global tech executives watched in amazement as Sarah conducted the entire conversation in Japanese. They couldn't understand the words, but they could see Mr. Tanaka's body language changing. He was leaning forward, showing interest in a way he never had during previous calls with Global Tech. Sarah explained Global Tech's capabilities and how they could support Tanaka Industries' expansion plans. But she did it in the Japanese way, slowly, respectfully, with careful attention to building the relationship rather than pushing for immediate results. The conversation lasted for over an hour. During that time, Sarah demonstrated knowledge not just of the Japanese language, but of Japanese business culture, manufacturing processes, and even recent developments in the Japanese technology sector that impressed Mr. Tanaka and his team. Near the end of the call, something incredible happened. Mr. Tanaka began speaking more animatedly, and you could see excitement in his expressions. He was asking questions, making suggestions, and engaging with the proposal in a way that had never happened in any of Global Tech's previous attempts. When the call finally ended, Mr. Tanaka bowed deeply and said something in Japanese that made Sarah smile for the first time in months. "What did he say?" Marcus asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "He said that finally, someone from Global Tech understands how to do business properly. He wants to move forward with the partnership. He's sending his team to visit our offices next month to finalize the details." The room erupted. Marcus couldn't believe it. This deal that had been dead in the water for 8 months had just come back to life in a single phone call. But word was spreading through the Global Tech offices like wildfire. Employees who had witnessed parts of the call were telling others. People were talking about the janitor who spoke perfect Japanese and had just closed a major international deal. Jessica Morrison, the HR director, was frantically trying to figure out what was happening. Brad Mitchell was getting phone calls from colleagues asking if it was true that the cleaning lady was some kind of language expert. The news reached every floor of the building. The woman that most employees had barely noticed was suddenly the center of attention. And not everyone was comfortable with what they were learning. Within hours of the successful call with Tanaka Industries, Marcus Wellington made a decision that would shake Global Tech to its core. He called an emergency meeting of the board of directors for the next morning. The boardroom was packed. All 12 members of the board were present, along with senior executives and department heads. The tension in the room was thick as Marcus prepared to address what many considered to be the most unusual board meeting in the company's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, "yesterday, something happened that has forced me to reevaluate everything about how this company operates. We have been struggling with international expansion for over 2 years, losing millions of dollars in failed negotiations. Yesterday, in one phone call, we closed a deal that had been stagnant for 8 months." He paused to let that sink in. "The person who made that deal happen has been working in this building for 3 years, but she wasn't in our international division. She wasn't in our executive training program. She was cleaning our offices at night." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some board members looked confused, others skeptical. Marcus continued, "Before we go any further, I want to show you something that was captured on our security cameras 3 days ago." He pressed a button on his laptop, and the large screen at the front of the room came to life. The security footage showed Brad Mitchell in the conference room, pointing his finger aggressively at Sarah Johnson, his face red with anger as he berated her in front of other executives. The audio was clear enough for everyone to hear Brad's words. "You're just a janitor. Stop pretending you understand business. People like you need to know your place." The room watched in uncomfortable silence as the footage continued, showing Sarah's dignified response and the stunned reaction of everyone present when she revealed her qualifications. When the video ended, the silence in the boardroom was deafening. Several board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The implications of what they had just witnessed were sinking in. "This," Marcus said firmly, "is completely unacceptable. But it gets worse. What you just saw was not an isolated incident. For 3 years, Sarah Johnson has been subjected to dismissive treatment, casual disrespect, and outright discrimination while possessing qualifications that surpass most of the people in this room." At this point, Marcus asked Sarah to join the meeting. When she walked into that boardroom, wearing a simple but professional outfit instead of her janitor's uniform, the transformation was striking. She carried herself with the confidence of the accomplished academic she truly was. "Board members," Marcus said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Johnson. She has a PhD in linguistics, speaks 17 languages fluently, and has over 15 years of experience in international business consulting." Sarah stepped forward and, in a clear, professional voice, began to address the board. "Good morning. Over the past 3 years, I have observed this company struggle with international expansion while possessing the exact expertise needed to solve these problems." She moved to the presentation screen and began displaying a comprehensive analysis she had prepared overnight. The first slide showed Global Tech's international failures over the past 2 years, with detailed breakdowns of why each deal had failed. "The pattern is clear," Sarah explained. "Every single failed negotiation can be traced to cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, or inappropriate communication strategies for the target market." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed analysis of the German automotive deal that had recently fallen through. Board member after board member leaned forward as Sarah continued her presentation. She wasn't just identifying problems, she was providing specific, actionable solutions. "I have developed a comprehensive strategy for successful expansion into 12 new international markets," she continued. "Each market requires a different approach based on cultural norms, business practices, and communication styles." Her next slide showed projected revenue increases based on successful implementation of her strategies. The numbers were staggering, potentially hundreds of millions in new revenue over the next 5 years. Sarah smiled and launched into detailed explanations of cultural protocols for each target market. She demonstrated her language skills by switching between different languages as she explained cultural nuances. She discussed business customs, decision-making hierarchies, and relationship-building strategies with the expertise of someone who had studied these topics for decades. The board members were exchanging amazed glances. This woman, who had been invisible to them for 3 years, was delivering one of the most impressive presentations they had ever seen. But then the uncomfortable questions began. Board member Robert Hayes asked, "Dr. Johnson, why didn't you ever approach management about using your skills? Why did you continue working as a janitor when you had this expertise?" Sarah's response was measured but pointed. "Mr. Hayes, in the 3 years I've worked here, how many times has anyone in management asked for my input on anything? How many times has anyone engaged me in conversation beyond basic pleasantries? The answer is 0, she continued. I applied for positions in international business when I first arrived in America. But without American work experience, without connections, and facing the biases that many immigrants encounter, cleaning jobs were the only employment I could find." Dr. Chen followed up, "But surely you could have mentioned your background to someone?" "I tried, but I was mocked and humiliated instead," she said. The uncomfortable truth was settling over the room like a heavy blanket. They all knew that Sarah was right. The corporate culture at Global Tech, like at many companies, had created invisible barriers that prevented them from recognizing talent that didn't fit their preconceived notions. At this point, Brad Mitchell, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, stood up to speak. "I think we're all getting carried away here," he said, his voice defensive. "Yes, maybe I was a little harsh the other day, but let's be realistic. We can't just promote the cleaning staff because they claim to have some education." The room fell silent. You could feel the anger building among the board members. Brad continued, apparently not reading the room. "I mean, anyone can claim to have a PhD. Anyone can say they speak languages. We need to focus on practical experience and proven results in our industry." Dr. Chen stood up, her voice icy. "Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that Dr. Johnson is lying about her credentials?" "I'm just saying we should verify these claims before we make any drastic decisions," Brad replied, still not understanding how badly he was making things worse. Marcus had heard enough. "Brad, Dr. Johnson's credentials have been verified. Her PhD is legitimate in TINGTH. And yesterday she accomplished in one phone call what our international division couldn't accomplish in 8 months." He continued, "But more importantly, your behavior toward Dr. Johnson has been completely unacceptable. The way you spoke to her, the way you treated her, reflects poorly on this entire organization." Sarah then did something that surprised everyone. She stood up and addressed Brad directly, but with a dignity and professionalism that made his previous behavior look even worse by comparison. "Mr. Mitchell," she said calmly, "I understand that this situation is uncomfortable for you. For 3 years, you have treated me with disrespect because you saw only my job title and not my qualifications. But that says more about the limitations of your perspective than it does about my worth as a person." The board members were watching this exchange with fascination. Here was a master class in professionalism and grace under pressure. Sarah continued, "I don't expect an apology from you, because I don't think you understand what you did wrong. But I hope that what happened here today will teach you to look more carefully at the people around you before you decide they have nothing to offer." The board's response was swift and unanimous. Dr. Patricia Chen spoke for the group. "Mr. Mitchell, your treatment of Dr. Johnson represents exactly the kind of thinking that has been holding this company back. Your inability to recognize talent because of your preconceived notions about job titles and appearances is a liability we cannot afford." Other board members chimed in with their own criticism of Brad's behavior. It became clear that his actions had not only been morally wrong, but had potentially cost the company millions of dollars in lost opportunities. Robert Hayes addressed the broader implications. How many other talented people are we overlooking because they don't fit our narrow definition of what expertise looks like? How many opportunities are we missing because we're not listening to the people around us? Marcus then presented his recommendation to the board. I propose that we offer Dr. Sarah Johnson the position of Director of International Relations with a mandate to lead our global expansion efforts and develop the cultural competency programs that we desperately need. The vote was unanimous. Sarah sat there, tears streaming down her face, as the board members applauded. 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of being overlooked and undervalued, had suddenly transformed into recognition and opportunity. But the board wasn't finished. Dr. Chen made another proposal. I also recommend that we conduct a comprehensive review of our hiring and promotion practices to ensure that we're not missing talent in other areas of our organization. As for Brad Mitchell, his fate was sealed. His contract was terminated immediately, not just for his treatment of Sarah, but for the attitude and judgment that had been hindering the company's success. The meeting concluded with Sarah being asked to present a detailed plan for international expansion within 2 weeks. As the board members filed out, many of them stopped to speak with her personally, welcoming her to the executive team and expressing their excitement about working with her. Marcus was the last to leave. Sarah, he said, I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened with Brad, but for the fact that it took us 3 years to discover what an asset you are to this company. Sarah smiled through her tears. Mr. Wellington, sometimes the best things are worth waiting for. I'm ready to help global tech become the international success story it has the potential to be. As Sarah walked out of that boardroom, she was no longer the invisible janitor. She was Dr. Sarah Johnson, Director of International Relations, ready to transform a company and prove that talent and expertise come in forms that many people never expect to recognize. The confrontation was over. Justice had been served, and the real work was about to begin. The next 24 hours would bring justice, transformation, and a new beginning that nobody at Global Tech could have imagined. By the end of that emergency board meeting, decisions had been made that would change lives forever. The first decision was about Brad Mitchell. His termination was immediate and final. The board cited harassment, creation of a hostile work environment, and behavior that was fundamentally incompatible with the company's values. Brad was escorted from the building that same afternoon, his 3 years of employment ending in disgrace. But Brad wasn't the only one who faced consequences. Jessica Morrison, the HR director who had enabled discriminatory behavior through her inaction and passive participation, was demoted from her executive position. She would remain with the company, but in a reduced role with mandatory diversity and inclusion training. The board made it clear that her failure to recognize and address the toxic environment under her watch was unacceptable. Meanwhile, Sarah Johnson was officially offered the position of Director of International Relations. The salary was more than triple what she had been earning as a janitor. More importantly, she would finally be able to use her education, her skills, and her passion for cross-cultural communication in a role that could make a real difference. When Marcus Wellington handed Sarah the official offer letter, she had to read it 3 times before the reality sank in. After 3 years of emptying trash cans and cleaning toilets, she was being offered a senior executive position at a major corporation. Sarah, Marcus said, I want you to know that this isn't charity. This isn't us trying to make up for past mistakes. This is us recognizing that you are exactly what this company needs to succeed internationally. Sarah's response was simple but profound. Mr. Wellington, You're giving me the chance to do what I've always been meant to do. I won't let you down." That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the offer letter, still hardly believing what had happened. The walls around her were covered with certificates, diplomas, and research papers that had seemed worthless for so long. Now suddenly, they represented a future she had thought was lost forever. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It was her sister's. For the next hour, Sarah told her sister everything that had happened. She described the confrontation with Brad, the board meeting, the job offer, and the incredible turn her life had taken. On the other end of the line, her sister was crying too, overwhelmed with joy for the woman who had sacrificed so much to support their family. "Sarah," her sister said, "Mama and Papa would be so proud. You never gave up on yourself, even when everyone else had given up on you." Sarah also called her elderly aunt, the only surviving member of her immediate family, who had raised her after her parents died. The old woman wept when she heard the news. "Child," her aunt said, "I always knew that your education would find its way back to you. Knowledge is like water. It always finds a way to flow where it needs to go." 6 months later, the transformation at Global Tech was nothing short of extraordinary. The company's international revenue had increased by 300%, making it one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the international market. Sarah had been busy from day one. She immediately began implementing the strategies she had outlined in her board presentation. The first step was building a team that could support global expansion, and Sarah knew exactly what that team needed to look like. Instead of hiring only from traditional corporate backgrounds, Sarah sought out talented individuals whose skills had been overlooked by other companies. She hired Maria Gonzalez, a former university professor from Mexico who had been working as a translator. She brought on Dr. Ahmed, an Egyptian engineer with a PhD who had been driving for a ride-sharing company while trying to get his credentials recognized in America. She hired Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese business expert who had been working in a restaurant while fighting for work visa approval. She recruited Dr. Priya Sharma, an Indian economist who had been substitute teaching while trying to break into the corporate world. Within months, Sarah had assembled the most diverse and qualified international relations team that Global Tech had ever seen. Each team member brought not only professional expertise, but lived experience from the cultures they were helping the company navigate. The results were immediate and dramatic. The German automotive deal that had been dead for months was not only revived, but expanded to include 3 additional German companies. The Japanese partnership with Tanaka Industries led to introductions to 5 other major Japanese corporations. Sarah's team successfully negotiated deals in France, Brazil, South Korea, India, and 8 other countries. Each negotiation was approached with cultural sensitivity, appropriate language skills, and deep understanding of local business customs. But Sarah didn't stop at just closing deals. She implemented comprehensive cultural training programs for all Global Tech employees who worked with international clients. She created detailed guides for conducting business in different countries, covering everything from appropriate meeting protocols to gift-giving customs. She also established something that was particularly close to her heart: a mentorship program for immigrant professionals. This program connected skilled immigrants who were struggling to find work in their fields with established professionals who could help them navigate the American corporate landscape. The program was revolutionary. Within 6 months, it had helped dozens of talented immigrants find meaningful employment, not just at Global Tech, but at companies throughout the region. Sarah worked with universities, professional organizations, and community groups to identify and support immigrant professionals who had been overlooked by traditional hiring processes. Marcus Wellington couldn't believe the transformation. In his quarterly address to employees, he said, 6 months ago, this company was hemorrhaging money on failed international deals. Today, our international division is our fastest growing and most profitable sector. This transformation didn't happen because we hired expensive consultants or implemented complex new systems. It happened because we finally recognized and utilized the talent that was already in our building. He continued, Dr. Sarah Johnson didn't just save this company millions of dollars. She taught us that our greatest assets might be the people we're not paying attention to. The success stories kept piling up. The company's stock price increased significantly as investors recognized the dramatic improvement in international performance. Global Tech was featured in business magazines as an example of how cultural competency could drive corporate success. But perhaps most importantly, the company culture began to change. Employees started paying more attention to their colleagues, recognizing that everyone had skills and experiences that might not be obvious from their job titles. The mentorship program expanded beyond immigrants to include anyone who felt their talents were being underutilized. A security guard revealed he had an accounting degree and was moved to the finance department. A cafeteria worker turned out to have software programming skills and joined the IT team. Sarah established quarterly forums where any employee could present ideas for improving company operations, regardless of their position or department. These forums generated dozens of innovative suggestions that led to improved efficiency and cost savings. The ripple effects spread beyond Global Tech. Other companies began examining their own practices, wondering what hidden talent they might be overlooking. Sarah was invited to speak at corporate conferences about recognizing and developing underutilized human resources. Universities began reaching out to Global Tech as a model for how to create inclusive corporate environments. Business schools added case studies about the company's transformation to their curricula. 2 years after her promotion, Sarah was invited to give a keynote address at Oxford University about the intersection of cultural competency and business success. Standing at the podium, where she had once defended her doctoral dissertation, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her full circle. But the most meaningful moment came during Global Tech's annual new employee orientation. Sarah had made it a tradition to personally address every group of new hires, sharing her story and the lessons it contained. Standing in front of 40 new employees from various departments and backgrounds, Sarah began with the story that had become legendary within the company. 2 years ago, she said, I was the night janitor in this building. Most of you probably never would have noticed me. I would have been invisible to you, just another person in a uniform doing a job that others considered unimportant. She paused, looking around the room at faces that were paying careful attention. But here's what I want you to understand. Every person in this building, every person you work with, every person you encounter in your professional life, has a story. They have skills, experiences, knowledge, and perspectives that might not be visible on the surface. Sarah continued, the person who cleans your office might be a former teacher. The security guard might be a talented artist. The person serving your lunch might have a degree in engineering. The quiet colleague in the corner might speak 5 languages and have insights that could transform your project. She gestured toward the diverse group in front of her. You were all hired because Global Tech now understands that talent comes in many forms and from many backgrounds. But more than that, you were hired into a culture that values looking deeper, listening more carefully, and recognizing that assumptions about people are often wrong. The new employees were hanging on every word. Many of them were immigrants themselves, or first-generation Americans, or people who had struggled to have their talents recognized. I want to challenge each of you to do something, Sarah said. Look around your workplace. Pay attention to the people you might normally overlook. Start conversations with colleagues you don't usually talk to. Ask questions about their backgrounds, their experiences, their ideas. She smiled, remembering her own journey. You might discover that the person you least expect has exactly the knowledge or skills that could help you solve a problem, improve a process, or open a new opportunity. Sarah's voice grew more passionate as she reached the heart of her message. But more importantly, treat everyone with the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their job title or position. Because someday, you might find out that the person you dismissed or overlooked was actually the most qualified person in the room. As Sarah concluded her presentation, she offered one final thought. This company succeeded internationally not because we hired the most expensive consultants or implemented the most sophisticated systems. We succeeded because we learned to see people clearly, to value diverse perspectives, and to recognize that expertise doesn't always come in the package we expect. The new employees gave her a standing ovation, but Sarah's favorite part came afterward, when several of them approached her individually to share their own stories of feeling overlooked or undervalued in previous jobs. Later that day, Sarah returned to her office on the 42nd floor. It was a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Her walls were covered with certificates, awards, and photos from international business trips. Her desk was covered with proposals for new market expansions and cultural training programs, but Sarah hadn't forgotten where she came from. Every evening at 10 p.m., she made it a point to walk through the building and greet the night shift workers. She knew all their names, asked about their families, and always reminded them that their work was valued and appreciated. She had also instituted a policy that any employee, regardless of position, could schedule a meeting with her to discuss ideas, concerns, or opportunities for professional development. Her calendar was regularly filled with these meetings, and they had generated some of the company's most innovative initiatives. As Sarah sat in her office that evening, reflecting on the day's new employee orientation, she thought about how far she had come. From cleaning these same offices to leading one of the company's most successful departments, her journey had been extraordinary. But more than her personal success, she was proud of what global tech had become. The company was now known not just for its technology products but for its inclusive culture and innovative approach to recognizing and developing talent. The mentorship program she had started had helped over 200 immigrant professionals find meaningful work. The cultural competency training had been adopted by dozens of other companies. The company's international success had created hundreds of new jobs and opportunities for advancement. The transformation at Global Tech proved something powerful. When organizations look beyond assumptions and create environments where all people can contribute their talents, everyone benefits. Companies become more successful, employees become more engaged, and society becomes more just. Sarah's story wasn't just about one woman's journey from janitor to executive. It was about the hidden potential that exists in every workplace, in every community, and in every person we encounter. It was about the cost of our assumptions and the incredible rewards that come from seeing people clearly. The janitor who spoke 17 languages had become the executive who opened doors for countless others. And that, perhaps, was the most beautiful transformation of all. If you loved this story, hit the subscribe button and share to others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.